G'day, welcome to Mark and Sam After Work. Today I want to do a video on scope height and just explaining and going through the details of scope height, fighting a little bit of a dogma that's been around for many years, but I suppose making sense of it for both the novice and the experienced shooter. So anyway, we might learn something, might not. Well, let's see how we go. I've got in front of me what you normally see me sort of shooting, a fairly typical setup what I shoot. A scope that is pretty high and a rifle set up to suit in the way of precision shooting. What you don't see much of, but this is actually just a little 22 pest control rig, but set up in very much in a hunting form the way I do it. And I suppose I'd start with, in both this and in that, there's a fairly high scope position. And I suppose where I'm really coming from to a degree is one, to explain all that and make sense of where you should be setting up your scope height, but also, like I said, a little bit of, there is an old school of thought of having your scope low. Lower is better. That's where it should be. There's a little bit of a couple of things. The thought of the fact your point blank range or your very close shooting, it needs to be close so that your scope is lined up with your barrel. And there's a little bit of truth at that. If you're shooting closer than 25 yards, then yes, and using a scope in that position, then yes, it does start to get easier to be able to just sight on, no hold over, no hold under, that sort of stuff, if you're shooting in very close ranges. But let's go to let's say 50 yards and onwards, and certainly 100 yards and onwards, and you'll find that up to, as far as I've tested, which is sort of 5 inches off the bore, there is no disadvantage, no difference, although slightly less hold over or slightly less bullet drop in the angle between those two once you go beyond 100 yards. That's obviously going extremely high, a 5-inch height of your scope center line to your bore of your rifle center line. And the more common stuff is in the 2 inches to 3 inches sort of neck of the woods, and absolutely no negatives on that sort of score. So only to be considered an issue if shooting pretty close to point blank, or up to really 20 yards, which for a high power rifle, not really relevant thing and not that hard to get around. Far more important things to consider in my mind. So there's that's the first thing, and I suppose then I'll also go through about cheek weld, or where you are putting the buttstock of or the cheek riser or the not cheek riser on your rifle and how you make that work. And I suppose we'll come back to, this is, although it's just a little 22, it's very much of an old classic design. Very low, and some get even lower still, so there can be some considerations there. Really, a woodstock was largely designed to start off with for no scope. Designed for open sights to be able to look down the bore. So you're getting your face very low to the bore, so even lower than this to get your face lower to the bore. And that was an ingredient of shooting with iron sights. Once you go to a scope, you've changed that equation, and a lot of people are keeping the scope low because of two things. One, it's a little bit of where rifles were designed, because they were designed with a lower cheek riser, or had no cheek riser, so a lower buttstock. A little bit of what people think looks good too, with the logic it's going to shoot straight as well, but having that scope down nice and low. A lot of comments I've heard, especially years ago, about getting that scope as low as they possibly could, because it looks nicer and it shoots better and it fits in the case, and or fits in the gun safe. There's all those sorts of reasons. Well, what I want to explain to you is there's some negatives to go with having your scope lower. As you see, this is just a little scope. I think it's just a little 32mm objective lens on it, so it looks like a reasonable space. It is on tall rings, or moderately tall rings, but I want to show you what it actually looks like when I sight up to this. This is how this is set up where I'm looking straight through my scope. You notice a couple of things. One is I've got the buttstock running through there. I'm not trying to use my cheek. I find anywhere on your face that you're comfortable with is okay to use. And the nature of, the higher I go, the more I have to tilt my head over to get this line to line up with my eye. The lower I go, the less I have to tilt my head over. Just a fulcrum point, but also a bit of the nature of the shape of my face and the average face. So there's a little win in going a little lower. There's another ingredient that's important to me, and obviously you have to be comfortable with that, but most of that comfort you'll find out of familiarity. So if you can go a little lower, it tends to work, and this is the real reason for doing it. This is like a fairly classic sort of style. The butt pad is fairly low. Now, you'll know out of a precision rifle, or what I've certainly explained on a precision rifle, the closer, or what should I say, when you fire a rifle, you've got essentially a hammer smack on the front of the barrel pushing straight backwards. Now, if you are pivoting from down the bottom here, when that hammer smack comes on, put it where you can see, when the hammer smack comes on, what's going to happen? You're going to get muzzle rise, because you have a fulcrum point where that pushes there, you end up with this twist happening. The higher up here you go, the less that actually matters. Now, as in a precision rifle, you'll see I have the butt pad set up to where my collarbone, which I use in shooting in prone, is directly behind. So largely forcing that rifle to go straight forward and back. I'll get into that later on. With a hunting rifle, you still get a lot of benefit out of that impact coming a lot straighter back rather than going up in the air. Keeping your sight picture, but also about making consistent shooting. So I'll just point out and demonstrate something. If I go down to the low area, where if you sat this down on low rings like a lot of people have tried to do, and I look through there, which would be where I'm actually going to be using that rifle if that scope was lower, have a look at that, how that rifle is actually hooking up on me. Where it's actually pushing from, the top of it is not in touch with my shoulder or my shoulder pocket. I'm actually engaging on this bottom part because I'm using the toe of the buttstock to actually do that. And that's because I have to get my eye down where the scope would be. By lifting it up, when you look at when I'm sighting through here, I'm using this part of my face, not my cheek, but have a look at how that's hooking up on my shoulder. That's actually going right across to the point where it's using this top point, which is going to make that shoot straighter. Now, obviously in a 22, it's not a huge issue, although it still can be an issue. But turn that into a 30-06, it's going to be a little bit larger, but all of a sudden it matters a lot more that I have it lower. And the way I've done that, without doing any other modification to the rifle whatsoever, is simply by raising my scope, which lowers my shoulder position. So, as said, I would go very much with, it's about comfort, but it's also about engineering. Ergonomics and actual practical engineering of how the firearm works. The comfort side of things is a little bit attached to what you're used to. So maybe in some cases, I saw a guy with a rifle more modern than this, a little Ticker 223 that came in recently saying he wanted to get a muzzle brake to stop muzzle. I wanted to get a better muzzle brake where he wanted to stop muzzle rise. Now I'll explain that I have explained it in other videos, and I'll explain it in future. But a muzzle brake, a normal muzzle brake, is designed to reduce recoil. You can get muzzle brakes that stop about muzzle lift as well, but there's another negative attached to that. But they are designed just to reduce the recoil, and yes, that'll stop a certain amount of the muzzle lift, or barrel rise, but it isn't where the problem is. When I looked at his setup, and I should say I'll finish on that quickly, although you can get muzzle brakes that stop muzzle rise, you're using one negative to fight another negative. You're getting actually pushed down, and the buttstock is trying to make the rifle move up, or your shooting style is making it move up. The muzzle brake is making the muzzle move down. You can actually get to the point where you're almost bending the rifle in the middle, which can work, and they can be accurate, but less likely to be consistent. Let's get back to this 223 conversation. When I looked, Jimmy had a normal 223, not this rifle, but a normal sort of with a lower buttstock and all the bits and pieces of a hunting rifle. But he had the scope down very low, where he thought it was great. He was a larger guy, and he was actually holding his rifle up like this. So right up to where he was only using the toe of the rifle. So the simple fix to go with him was to reposition his scope to actually stop that muzzle rise. And that's a little bit of where this conversation comes from. But I suppose it also goes into the instance of the precision rifle you got in front of you. Now this is set up with exactly the same logic, or actually even more so. And whether this is a rifle like this one, this is one of the MDT ACC chassis with a fully adjustable butt pad, or it's, as I've shown previously on the channel, where I'm just using a Boyd stock, or I've used other rifles where I need to adjust, I need to make modifications, put on a separate cheek riser, or modify the butt pad, or whatever it is. The core ingredient of setting up a precision rifle actually hinges all around the scope as well. Now I tend to do it the other way around. I tend to do it to where I get my rifle, to where I get the butt pad to the place where it's in line with the line of push. And not just the top of it. I want the collarbone, which as said I use in precision shooting or in prone shooting or bench shooting, but when I'm precision shooting I use my collarbone to where I'm at positioning, prone shooting largely. And I want that to be in the place where it can pick up full contact and stop the rifle from moving, or to hold the recoil, to be in line with that center line of the barrel. So that's lined up. That's my first ingredient of what I'm doing. The next ingredient I want to do on that sort of level is I shape up to the rifle, make sure my shoulder bone there, and get to where my head position is comfortable. So I don't want to be squinching my neck over too far. I'm old enough and stiff enough and broken enough I don't want to bend my neck a long way back. I want to go to a comfortable place where my head is extended but not overextended. My neck is bent to where it's sort of straightening up and from the prone position. So I run the rifle a little bit higher to be able to do that side of things. I use the A-frame of shoulders and elbows as a stable point. I get my chest off the ground a little bit and I straighten out my neck. Now whether you're doing, or I suppose it comes down to what I'm actually trying to say is I find a more comfortable position. I also don't want my head twisted over too far. I don't want to be like this to try and sight through the rifle. I want to be as close as I can to a natural position in a prone, in a laying down position. So that's the position I want to be in. And then I make this other stuff work. Now what I've found, and to the majority of people I've found, and even my little short spotter at 5'1.5" versus 6'4", she'll get behind my rifles, and even when they're set up for me, they're not that far away from what suit her. So what I've got is my cheek riser is down to where it's using my jaw rather than my cheek. That puts where my neck position's better. I know my collarbone's at this place here, and this is how high my scope looks. And a rifle like this, it's got a barrel guard. And there's, in the front here, you've got almost an inch of a clearance, which should be for a lot of people way too large. The scope's too high, it looks peculiar. And I suppose I'll put up another rifle here, set up in a similar form, so you can get an idea of what that actually is looking like in a normal rifle form. Okay, this is a Magnum stock. This is actually a APRS rifle, 7mm Rem mag, done a lot of work with it, shoots really well. Probably a little bit lower than I set up some of them. This is just running normal rings and bits and pieces, but still, as you can see, decent clearance to our barrel over the top. A nice big heavy barrel and still decent clearance, so up higher than what a lot of people are setting things. This one here, I could probably go a little bit further, but nice heavy rifle and a 7mm Rem mag. Once again, got that same thing going on. Got my butt pad. I actually made some modifications to this, and I suppose that's part of what I would say here. I'm making sure that I make the right shoot as well as possible. So by raising my butt pad, I've done that to where I get my shoulder to the right place, and then everything else is working with it. I suppose the key ingredient here is there isn't a right place to put a scope for the rifle's sake. There is a right place to put a scope for what you're using it and for your shape and what you're comfortable with. The last thing I would put a scope in, to be truthful, for is because it suits the rifle case. I'm not going to put my scope lower because it suits a rifle case. I'm going to put the scope to where I am comfortable or to where it shoots better. The other last thing that I would be recommending doing is doing it because I think it looks better like that. If shooting it doesn't matter, for sure, you go with what you think looks the best. But if it's shooting it best, making you a better shooter, making it work better, and I suppose to a degree getting used to what actually works better and turning that into the better look would be my goal. But I always do things around an engineering sense, and whether you're looking at something like this in a precision rifle, or you're shooting at something like this, and like I said, be that a 30-06 or be that a 308 or be that a 223 or be it a 22, is all the similar things involved. I really want to get to where, as much as possible, I've got it to where it shoots nice and straight. Now, the way I do it is per caliber, is I'm trying to get my shoulder point closer to in line with this, and that means that I would then start to run a different buttstock. If I was shooting this in a 30-06, I probably would trying to get a rifle stock that put my shoulder position a little higher and maybe run the scope even a little higher. But really, this is still a pretty decent setup, and the main difference to what you're normally going to see is fairly tall rings. So I suppose the video is about scope height. I would finish it off by saying there isn't a right height. It is about those things. It's about making it shoot better, about making you more comfortable, but lower isn't better. If it doesn't fit the rifle case and that's what it's about, or it doesn't fit the gun safe and that's what it's about, maybe that's where you should put your focus, into sorting out that gun safe or sorting out that rifle case. But certainly like I said, I'd finish off with it comes down to what suits you. This is certainly what I've found. It improves shooters. I've seen it happen quite regularly. Groups, consistency, ability under fire, when under pressure in a hunting shot and all that sort of stuff. When the rifle doesn't move as much, when it shoots better, when you're more comfortable, and all those things fall into line, tends to make you work better when you are like I said, it's about what you do on your bad days and your bad moments rather than what you do in your best moments. And these are part of the ingredients I go with. And largely a higher rifle scope than what is average out there is normally going to suit you a fair bit. But not trying to preach too much. You go with what suits you. This is just like I started with, hopefully going to help the average shooter in the way of either justifying what they're doing or helping with what they're up to. The novice shooters trying to figure things out, I'd go a little higher rather than a little lower. There's not too many negatives to going a little bit higher, apart from that rifle case, like I said, that I was talking about. And other than that, guys, thank you very much for checking in. Also, I do a little shout out to Joe from Cyclops Cyclops Video Reviews. They do a whole heap of reviews on all sorts of scopes, from the lower end to the mid-range to some of the higher end stuff. He does a very plain folks, very genuine, speaks his mind about things, but does a lot of testing, very thorough about testing. So a pretty good place to go and find some pretty decent information on a lot of different scopes. He just put on a video linking or using one of our videos and talking about scope leveling, and I just wanted to thank him for that. But I thought I'd give a shout out for those people looking for scope reviews. Joe, or over there at Cyclops Videos, very much worthwhile the look. Anyway, guys, thank you very much for checking in. I'll catch you next time.